Bernstein again. Big opening. Pass 5. Pass 10. Verbal's a man. And he goes all the way to the 15-yard line. 17 yards out the terror.
Welcome back to Bleav in Badgers on the Bleav Network, presented by BetOnline.ag and Oakbridge Wealth Management. I'm Matt Perkins, joined as always by Badger legend, the Hebrew Hammer himself, Matt Bernstein. Bernie, how are we doing today?
We're doing great, man. Every day on the podcast with you, Matt Perkins, is a holiday. It's an exciting week. We didn't have football last weekend because we had a bye. We're pumped to go out to this beautiful Sunshine State and take on USC. I think it'll be an exciting game, if anything. Looking to be competitive. But I'm excited to hear how Cooper Perkins and Matt Perkins have some kind of lineage back from somewhere where you guys must be related.
I don't know. Only if his family is originally from Maine. That's the only way that we're probably going to be related. But yes, as Bernie said, we have Cooper Perkins from Bleav in USC, play-by-play, does a little bit of everything out there in Southern California. Really appreciate you taking some of your time with us.
Yeah, guys, happy to. You know, Matt, maybe our ancestors crossed in the Mayflower together. Who knows?
So funny you should say that. So my father's family, my Perkins name, does go back to the Mayflower. So
you said it went back to Maine. You didn't say it went back further than that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
we all just somehow came from Maine.
Yeah, well, it's a long story. It's a long story. But before we get into it, going to pay a couple bills and remind everyone tuning in that we are presented by BetOnline.ag. Continue to be presented by them, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. If you think you know your stuff, get in on the $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker. Unwind with over 150 slot games and more. Head on over to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online. The game starts here. Also want to remind everyone that we continue to be presented by Chris Anicetti and his team over at Oakbridge Wealth Management. If you are a current or future professional athlete or NCAA athlete with NIL deals, Chris is the man to get in touch with. And his team at Oakbridge Wealth Management will put together a bespoke financial plan to help you do what you do best, which is perform on the field. They do one thing, and that is take care of athletes. They know what your demands are every single day. So they take care of your money for you. Get in touch with Chris on Instagram at OakbridgeWM_Anicetti. That's OakbridgeWM_ANICETE. Or go over to the website, OakbridgeWealthMGMT.com. That's Chris Anicetti and Oakbridge Wealth Management. Cooper, before we talk about this year's USC team, we want to get to know you a little bit more. So how did you get to where you are hosting a USC podcast, doing play-by-play from being little Cooper Perkins, wherever that was not in the state of Maine?
Yeah, no, for sure. It was not in the state of Maine, I can promise you that. I'm actually born and raised in Los Angeles. So I grew up in a USC family. I ended up going to USC myself, third generation. So I was kind of indoctrinated from a very young age that Trojan football is what it's all about. And I was growing up in like the early Pete Carroll days, and by the time I got there, it was we had 4 head coaches in my 4 years at USC, which was just a miserable time. I got the Lane Kiffin experience, got the Steve Sarkisian experience. Glad to see both of those guys having success, albeit not in Cardinal and Gold. But went to USC actually to study finance and pivoted about 2.5, 3 years in, and was just like, this is a terrible idea. I don't want to do this for a career. And ended up getting into sports broadcasting and announcing and fell in love with play-by-play and moved all around the country. Lived actually in Wisconsin for a little bit, lived in beautiful Wisconsin Rapids for a summer after my junior year of college, calling baseball games for the Raptors out there. Got to visit Madison, Green Bay. So seen quite a bit of the cheese state, actually. But yeah, man, just moved around the country a bunch and finally about 2.5 years ago, moved back to Southern California and started building out my play-by-play portfolio and get to do a lot of stuff now. The most fun thing in the fall is high school football on the Bally Sports family of networks that actually gets broadcasted nationally. We got awesome recruits in Southern California, great teams. So it's really a blast getting to see the next generation of kids. But that's just kind of the quick synopsis on how I got from being Tiny Cooper wearing his Dwayne Jarrett USC jersey to 29-year-old Cooper who now still is similarly crushed every time they lose a heartbreaker.
Well, then the Michigan game must have been a tough one for you.
Oh, dude. I don't even know how to put into words how frustrating and upsetting that was because, I'll get into some more serious thoughts about this as I kind of explain why it's so frustrating. Because that's a game that they did enough to win and ultimately did not win. And that's even with playing an atrocious first half. So I take so much of that game and I was inspired and optimistic coming out of it. And it felt so fitting at the end that it all came down to a 4th and goal at the 2-yard line because it felt like this is the baptism into the Big Ten. If we're going to do this, we have to make this kind of play. It's the football gods deciding that this is how it has to be. Ultimately they didn't make the play. You lose the game and that's how it shakes out. But, I walked away from that game devastated because it was a game that they did enough to win outside of about 3 to 4 plays, but they didn't win. And, going back to my predictions and picks before the season, I said 2-1, win over LSU, win over Utah State, lost to Michigan. The route to getting to 2-1 was a lot different than I thought it would be, but it's about the same. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. You have to zoom back to the 10,000-foot view and just kind of say, we're kind of where we thought we'd be. Things have just looked a lot different than I think we expected them to appear.
So, Cooper, I definitely want to touch on the Michigan stuff. First off, coming to the Big Ten as a Wisconsin Badger, we hate Michigan more than anyone. And I was definitely cheering for USC.
No, it's weird, Bernie. Hold on. You hate Michigan more than anyone.
Specifically me.
Bernie does. Badgers in general hate Minnesota more than anyone.
Us East Coast Badgers hate Michigan.
Yes, I also am an East Coast Badger, and I also hate Michigan, but I still feel like the most burning.
But why? Hating Minnesota feels like punching down at this point for Wisconsin.
It's the Paul Bunyan Acts. It's the biggest rivalry in college football, even if it's not the most known. It's been played for over 100 years.
It's the most played rivalry.
They played for the Paul Bunyan Acts. It's this whole thing. When we were playing in that game, it was the most up-tempoed week. You couldn't lose the Axe. It's this whole thing. They put in the locker room, if you lose, the Axe trophy stays there, case stays there with nothing in it. It's like a big slap in your face every time you go in there. It's a big deal. I can give you more. They play us winning on the big screens all around the locker room, chopping down the goalposts. For the whole week, you can't change the channel. It's that on loop. So it's a big week. But I would say that from the East Coast, and probably from California too, you have a lot of people who choose either Wisconsin or Michigan. And then after that, you just hate the other school, no matter what. We didn't have a lot of success until my last game playing where we beat Michigan. So you just hate them. They also think they're the best all the time. Cooper, you will figure this out. You'll see some Michigan people, they wear their stuff everywhere. It's the ugliest colors you'll ever see. They think their stadium's the best. There's a lot of things I hate about him, Cooper, okay? All right. Let's go back for a second. You're a longtime USC fan. I think almost everyone in America watching Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush, we were watching games all the time. So the culture there is pretty awesome. Yes, they've had some up and down years. When you heard that they were going to get looped into the Big Ten or join the Big Ten, what was your thought process there?
So I actually was thrilled. I thought that was great news. It was unexpected news because it seemed like the kind of move that was too pie in the sky. And USC historically has been a very conservative institution with kind of how it sees itself in the landscape. For me personally, and I've reiterated this for the better part of 10 years, that USC ought to go independent in football. Now, the Big Ten is a far better result than going independent, but it accomplishes the same goal. And the reason for that is that the Pac-12 was essentially a vampire sucking the blood out of USC with nothing to gain for the Trojans. And that was really highlighted in the peak sanction years after Pete Carroll left from 2009, 2013 under Lane Kiffin. Got chopped down to 45 scholarship players, which is not enough to field a competitive football team at an FBS level, let alone at a power conference level. And all the Pac-12 did at that point was dance on USC's grave and preach parity. Larry Scott, the commissioner at the time, really emphasized how important parity was to the league as opposed to supporting the truly only brand nationally that has the kind of value that USC does to the league. And, Oregon likes to think of itself as having the same kind of value, and that's just fundamentally not true. And we know that because when they were valued going into the Big Ten, they received a half share. So at best, they are half the value of USC. Now, as it pertains to the schools left behind in the Pac-2 now, Pac-7, whatever the hell's going on with the new Mountain West that they're putting together, Oregon State and Washington State have absolutely no business being associated with USC. In fact, the only thing that separates those two schools from being Fresno State and San Jose State is the fact that they were best friends with the big boys 75 years ago. Now, that entitles them to nothing going forward, and that in no way makes them relevant. So as much as those two fan bases like to think of themselves as having been cheated or wronged out of something that they'd earned, they had no business riding the coattails of USC nor any of the major brands that departed the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. I think Washington and Oregon do deserve a bit of support in that. And for that reason, I thought that the move to the Big Ten was tremendous. I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was creative because it was something I hadn't even thought of. I thought the best case scenario was USC goes independent. Going to the Big Ten is significantly better for all sports in every way. I mean, the money is far better. The exposure is far better. The quality of football, not having to put together an independent schedule every year, is far better. So as far as I'm concerned, it is the best thing that USC could have done as an institution, trying to look out for its own interests. Did it kill the Pac-12? Yeah. And there is not an ounce of remorse about that. USC killed the Pac-12 to go lose to Michigan in week 3, and no one should care about it other than Oregon State and Washington State because they're crying all the way to the new Mountain West.
So quick question before we get into this year's team. You said Oregon and Washington we're good partners. You didn't say UCLA. Would you have preferred Stanford or UCLA go with USC, Oregon, and Washington to the Big Ten?
I think that's a great question. And holistically speaking, UCLA is the better athletic program than Stanford. Stanford sponsors more sports than any school on the West Coast, so their national championship numbers are a little bit inflated because they host 36 varsity sports, including things like sailing and rowing, things that are not particularly common among major schools in the West Coast. But I think UCLA is the right, or at least was the right tandem to go with USC because that is necessary from a culture standpoint. There's nothing about Oregon or Washington that is culturally relevant to USC other than Oregon being annoying. UCLA, though, is it's like a sibling that you very much dislike but respect for a lot of reasons. Football has never been UCLA's forte. They've had their seasons. The basketball, they've always been far better than USC. As far as the other competitive sports go, baseball, all the way down to the Olympic sports, they've always been highly competitive schools between one another. And academically, they're pretty comparable, which I think serves the Big Ten, idea and ethos pretty well. And you needed some kind of travel partner, something to make it a little bit more logistically feasible. I thought UCLA would be a better partner than Stanford simply because USC and UCLA, I think, see themselves in similar ways. Stanford does not see itself in a similar way to those schools. Stanford is like a quasi-West Coast Ivy League school with a sense of false superiority that is unmatched nationally. I think it's a great thing that Stanford was left out of the Big Ten. It would have been hilarious if they'd been left out of the ACC. I think they would have dropped football if they'd been left out of the ACC. And I still think that that's actually a possibility down the road because Stanford's academic side is not interested in athletics. They've already tried to trim back a handful of their athletic programs to great protests from their alumni. But Stanford has no business being in the Big Ten. Look at the stadium that they play in. That hosts 33,000 people, and they struggle to get 15,000 in that barn. That's not Big Ten football. That's not Big Ten anything. That's pathetic is what that is.
Northwestern would beg to differ.
Yeah, you know what? You're not wrong. I mean, Northwestern academically belongs in the Big Ten, but they're kind of the Washington State, Oregon State dilemma here where they were friends with the big boys at the right time and now just get to coast into the future.
Yeah, and they didn't pull University of Chicago.
Exactly.
So, okay. So now I want to move forward to the 2024 team. And you see, Bernie and I are wearing these hats now, these melon hats that were sent over to us. And, I wore it last time, it's getting comfortable on me, but it got us thinking, okay, so we're going to do, something with a sponsor, something with melon. So what we're going to ask you, Cooper, we're going to have a segment here called Hang Your Hat on It, presented by Melon, the world's most durable hat. Learn more at melon.com, melin.com. Put it to the test yourself. We're putting it to the test with our guest. Cooper, what can the Trojans, the 2024 Trojans, hang their hat on as a team this season? So what can they always rely on no matter what?
We've seen 3 games worth of data points, and the thing that this team can hang its hat on is effort, which is something that, as a USC fan, frankly, is astounding to say. For much of the last 15 years, USC has struggled to compete at a top level. And in the handful of seasons where they have been nationally relevant, those teams have coasted primarily off of talent. This is not the most talented USC team that has been there in the last 15 years. This is a fairly talented group that is extraordinarily hardworking and bought in, which, again, is a foreign concept to us onlookers because that has not been the culture at USC. Between the LSU game and the fight against Michigan, coming back from down 2 scores to take a lead in the fourth quarter and come ever so close to winning that game on the road in the Big House, I think it's evident that this team can hang its hat on effort and really seriously believing in themselves. They set out to change the culture in the offseason. You know, everyone thought Lincoln Riley was blowing smoke when he said, we're going to change all of these things. We're going to prioritize defense. We're going to prioritize toughness. And I think they've followed through on every one of those promises to this point. So as far as the Melon hats and all this goes, USC's hanging its hat right now on effort.
I wish you said something different. Although I love that answer. I just wish you said something different.
It's also perfect because Melon is, as they say, the world's most durable hat. Learn more at melon.com. Put it to the test yourself. Okay, now we're going to put you...
Don't ask us that question, Cooper.
Yeah.
Don't ask us.
Wisconsin can't hang their hat on very much these days.
We can. Skilled positions. DBs.
No? Yeah, DBs. We can hang our hat on DBs, except when Ryan Williams just runs a go route past the nickel back for a 35-yard touchdown, completely uncontested. Different story for a different time. One thing that surprised me, though, Cooper, I will say, this season about the Trojans, a lot of people assumed Miller Moss would be putting up gaudy numbers because he's a Lincoln Riley quarterback. Hasn't quite been there statistically. You know, he's not in the top 20 nationally in any major statistical category. I don't want to ask what's going wrong because I don't think he's playing poorly, but what's different about this team that accounts for that statistical regression, even from the bowl appearance where he was absolutely lights out?
I think there are a couple things at work here. The most important piece, though, is to kind of make the case that Miller Moss isn't doing anything wrong. Miller Moss probably has the most challenging quarterback resume through 3 games of any quarterback in the country, between having played LSU and having played Michigan, both in fairly hostile environments, with LSU being about a 60-40 split in Las Vegas and obviously the Big House being the Big House. So I think that those numbers to some extent are suppressed by the quality of competition. The other aspect at work, as we saw on Saturday against Michigan, the offensive line has not been very good. It's really difficult to be a pocket passer when there is no time to throw the football. I think he's done an absolutely exceptional job handling that. I think the kid's toughness cannot be questioned. I mean, he's got a pair of onions on him. That kid hangs in there, takes shot after shot, and gets up. And after a really, frankly, terrible first half against Michigan, came out and was unbothered by it. So I think that the numbers are slightly misleading because of the quality of competition, but all of the important pieces that you want to see from a quarterback have been near flawless. The big mistake against Michigan was the pick 6, and I think that's a mistake of inexperience in a game setting as opposed to a scheme problem or Miller being uncomfortable. I think it's just as simple as that's his 4th career start. He shouldn't be throwing it in Will Johnson's direction at all, let alone on a quick out on 3rd and 2 when that's exactly what they put on tape against Utah State 2 weeks prior. So, that's a mistake of inexperience. But when I look at Miller Moss, I don't think that the numbers tell any kind of story. He's going to get his. He's going to pile up stats. He's going to throw for a zillion yards against Minnesota and Rutgers and UCLA. And at the end of the season, we're going to be looking at it, and Miller Moss will have 3,800 yards passing and 30 touchdowns, something along those lines. But for right now, I would caution Badger fans to not consider the quarterback numbers all that much, and instead use the eye test if you're willing and able, have the time to go watch any USC film, and let your eyes tell the story for you. Is that a kid that is 55th in the country in QBR, or is that a kid that you should be worried about? And I think the answer is it's a kid that every defense should be worried about.
I mean, Cooper, you guys also, watching last year's tape, right? Your first game against a Big Ten is the national champions. I mean, that's a big feat. Number 18, right? You guys were ranked number 11. You know that they're going to be physical. You know the Big Ten's physical. They're going to win up front. Before the season, when you're like, man, we're jumping to the Big Ten, and you look at the schedule, you're like, oh, damn. Is that what you guys are thinking? Like, is your mentality like, give us anyone? Or is it like, hey, it would have been nice to kind of limp in here against maybe like a Nebraska, although they're not so bad, or maybe like a Rutgers or like a Maryland or somebody?
No. The mentality is absolutely give us anybody, give us the best right away. I think there also is a little bit of sentiment that catching Michigan early in the season would be a good thing. Clearly, they don't have themselves figured out. I think they kind of ended up in a weird no man's land where it would have been great to catch Michigan a week prior or a week after, because having no film of the Alex Orji offense definitely made that a more complicated task. Yes, Michigan couldn't throw the ball, but they were really creative in the run game. And I think that with at least a week's worth of film, Danton Lynn would have made life even more difficult on that Michigan rushing attack that, outside of three big plays, did not do very much. I mean, they ran three plays the entire third quarter of that game. And until Kalel Mullings popped for 63 on the final drive, they didn't have a first down. So I don't look at that as the defense struggling. I look at it as the defense failed to make three key plays that decided the game. But, we walked into that game expecting to get the best team in the country, or one of the best teams in the country. And at USC, there has always been a degree of expectation that you take on the best anywhere, any place, anytime. I think that was embodied, under Pete Carroll, going to Auburn, going to Arkansas, going to Nebraska, playing these tough, true road games. And that era of tough, true road games in non-conference is kind of dead. But I think this team embodied that when they had to go play LSU in week one. They were ready for this. And us as a fan base, we want this. We don't want to beat Pac-12 schools. We want to beat Big Ten schools. I'll dump on them even more. We don't care about beating Oregon State and Washington State. Those aren't fun wins. Those are wins that you expect. We want to win games that need to be won, not that need to not be lost. And that's a massive difference, right? Like, do Badger fans go out and worry about, beating Akron in week one? No, and that's not even that fun, right? Like, you want to go beat Michigan, and the mentality, I think, is very much the same at USC.
I'd say the Big Ten mentality is a strong one. All right, so question. You see Wisconsin. You guys are seeing a lot of new teams. Is seeing Wisconsin come to town, is that attractive for fans at USC?
I think it's interesting because it's not as novel as it might seem because of the nature of the Rose Bowl. For the last 20 years, I think a lot of Wisconsin fans have made their way to Los Angeles. And, the way that the city is structured geographically, it's not like they're just all around the stadium. Fans who come from the Midwest, be it, Wisconsin for a Rose Bowl, Michigan, Ohio State, whoever, they're pretty ever present when they make their way into town. So I don't think it's fun from a novelty standpoint, but I think it's interesting. I'm really curious more than anything about what the stadium's going to look like in that game, because I think there's a little bit of a national expectation that the Big Ten fan bases are going to travel well enough to neutralize some home field. I think that's going to be very true at UCLA, but I have no idea, honestly, what it's going to look like at the Coliseum. So I think that's a very curious thing that we're fascinated by. But, as long as the fan bases don't behave like Oregon fans, I think anybody's welcome. All takers, we're happy to have them. As long as there's not this ridiculous sense of false accomplishment without having ever won anything of significance, you're welcome at Coliseum. We'd love to have you. Fans are great. And I think the USC fan base generally is a very respectful and good fan base, both at home and on the road. And so I'd expect most Big Ten fan bases, based on my experience from, having gone to Rose Bowls and having lived in the Midwest for a couple periods of time, there's nothing about Big Ten fan bases that wouldn't be welcome in Southern California.
Listen, man, we've lost to Oregon twice at the Rose Bowl in the past, just over a decade. I've not had the best interactions with that fan base in general. So we're not like the most excited to have them. I'm not going to lie. Washington seems great.
Washington is great.
Washington seems absolutely wonderful. It feels like Wisconsin and Washington have like a lot in common culturally in some ways. A little bit more concerned about our brothers and sisters in Eugene.
I gave you a little bit of an analogy on what UCLA is, right? They're a sibling that you don't particularly like, but you respect them. You see what they do. They have a good career, a good family. You raised your kids very differently, but you respect them. Oregon's like the guy that moved in down the street that owes you money. He's not welcome. You don't particularly want to see him. He caught you when you maybe were a little buzzed and you lent him $20, and now there's no chance you're ever getting it back. That's Oregon. That's what Oregon is in this dynamic. And I'm glad that some other fan bases now have to engage with that and recognize on a national scale just how frustrating and obnoxious they are.
Full disclosure, I went to grad school at UCLA. So
hey, great, awesome school.
I'm used to it. I worked at USC while I was in grad school at UCLA. I don't have animosity like that way. Maybe it's because I was just there for grad school, not undergrad. There might be that. I think there was a little bit more of that amongst the undergrads, but we had nothing but like great things with USC. So I've got no problem here. I did have a problem with Oregon at the 2011 Rose Bowl. Bernie and I were both there. Long story.
Last thing I'll say about Oregon, because this is a Wisconsin and USC podcast, and I hate to let them have this rent-free in my head, but the only thing that separates Oregon from being Oregon State or Washington State is one ultra-rich donor who happens to love football. There is nothing of relevance about the University of Oregon, not academically nor athletically, outside of the Phil Knight connection that entitles them to being a part of the Big Ten or any national conversation. So I would love for that fan base to be a little bit more self-aware of kind of what their reality is, that Oregon is nothing without a single hyper-rich, hyper-powerful, hyper-interested individual, and without that perfect storm of the only billionaire that seems to care about college football. That's a program that is not relevant in any way.
You played Michigan with a lot of billionaires that care about football. I think Wisconsin
none of them have Phil Knight money.
No, not Phil Knight money.
The only guy I think was who's the old Oklahoma State?
T. Boone Pickens, yeah.
T. Boone Pickens. I think he was the last one. The other like oil tycoon who just had billions and billions of dollars to invest in Oklahoma State. And much like Oregon, they didn't win a national title, and Oregon hasn't won a national title to everyone's actual.
And they had a lot of fun uniform combinations, right?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's get back to the important things: Trojans, Badgers. You'd mentioned Danton Lynn, and he and Matt Entz were, I think, really big signings on the coaching staff, and they've done a lot. As someone who follows UCLA football, I was very upset to see Danton Lynn go, but I understand why. He can get a lot more money at USC, play bigger games. Matt Entz, I thought that came out of left field, and that was a coup because he is very smart. And now Wisconsin has your former DC, Alex Grinch, the much maligned Alex Grinch during his stay in Southern California. First of all, where did it go wrong for him at USC? And then how has the shift been to these new faces on the defensive side of the ball?
I think with Alex Grinch, it's important to look at his career as a whole as a defensive coordinator, because his issues at USC weren't all that new, nor were they unexpected. He struggled at Oklahoma. He struggled at Ohio State, so much so that they replaced him after a season. And really the only instance of Alex Grinch having success was at Washington State. And I'm fairly convinced that he was hired by Ohio State for one singular performance at Washington State, which was when USC actually with Sam Darnold went to pull him in and lost. And I think that what really was interesting is without Hercules Mataafa, who was an undersized but extraordinarily fast defensive tackle, Alex Grinch's defense has struggled at every stop. He prioritizes this speed D in a way that is extraordinarily high risk and high reward. We saw the high risk capacity of it for 2 years at USC, and for parts of the first season of Lincoln Riley, we saw the high reward where they had tremendous turnover luck. But as turnover luck is any other kind of luck, it dries up eventually, and it's not something you can rely on consistently. So I think things went wrong with Alex Grinch from a scheme and philosophy standpoint. I also think that he culturally was a horrific fit at USC because historically USC defense has been built along the defensive line, the linebacking core. Big bodies, big guys, Chris Claiborne, Keith Rivers, like dudes in the middle. And Alex Grinch prioritizes a smaller speed D kind of linebacker, defensive lineman, a lot of slanting, a lot of stunting, a lot of things that just feel too creative at times. And what it came down to was ultimately the players didn't understand the defense well enough to consistently be in the right position. There was a joke that was constantly circulated around the USC fan base of defensive players wearing quarterback wristbands. And if your defensive players need to read the play, you're probably not doing a good job. And I think that was true. I think Alex Grinch, more than anything, inundated those players with far too much information and far too much creativity. And to some extent, I think he looked at the roster that they had and felt such a need to scheme around deficiencies that he went way too far to the opposite end of the spectrum and created this system that was essentially unplayable. I mean, it wasn't just problematic, because there were decent players on that team. Look at USC's defense right now. They're playing well. Tackett Curtis, who's at Wisconsin right now, he was starting on that team and struggled immensely. I mean, it's not for a lack of talent. And like my roommate, who I went to USC with, who was a great football player in his own right at one point, we got dinner a couple of weeks ago, and he made a hilarious comment to me that I think is really true, that coaching in college football is everything. Because either USC's defensive coaching staff missed on every single recruit for 2 years, or the coaching was that bad. And I think one of those two possibilities is significantly likelier than the other, because as the adage goes, even a blind squirrel finds a nut, right? There's no way every player on that defense was a recruiting miss. And so with Alex Grinch, I think he just schemed his way into trouble, and at a certain point lost the locker room. That was very evident. And once that happens, there's no coming back. I mean, once the guys aren't bought in anymore, you can't play defense. And so it got really bad really quickly. It doesn't mean he's not a smart guy. I think that he's in a good situation not having to be a coordinator, because it seems like a classic case of distance from the problem helps to solve some of the issues. I think the next time he has an opportunity as a coordinator, he'll do far better, partially out of the influences that he'll get at Wisconsin, but more importantly, just out of stepping back and not being on the ledge, so to speak, not having to constantly think about scheming around talent and scheming around problems. Because defense at its core is a really simple thing. And Alex Grinch, for the last 5 years of his career, made it exceptionally complicated.
Technology, when you mute yourself, you forget you're muted. Especially when you play fullback, you forget a lot more things. I would say I agree with your roommate. Coaching to me is everything. You have young kids, like out of high school, with who knows how well they were coached. A lot of these dudes are athletes who don't have their coaches are teachers who might not be the best football coaches. My coach said it best when we had him on the show, right, Matt Perkins? My job is to get you to hit your genetic ceiling. And I think that sums it up, right? You got to get these guys to play the best football they can possibly be. So I agree with you. Let's take that into what Saturday looks like. I'm going to answer your question a little bit backwards. What does Wisconsin have to do to beat USC?
I think Wisconsin has to pressure the quarterback. I think Wisconsin has to dominate the line of scrimmage defensive. USC's offensive line has been shaky. It's really young. It does have quite a bit of talent, but it's also built off of developmental players who you probably don't want to see the field until year 3 or year 4, who are starting in year 2. So they're naturally going to be growing pains with that. That is really important, not just stopping the run and making USC one-dimensional through the pass, but also disrupting the passing game through pressuring Miller Moss. He's not particularly escapable. His pocket presence is, I think, mediocre. He does a really good job before he's made his mind up on where he's going with the football. Once he's decided what he's doing with the football, he's very vulnerable. That it's like that clock in his head shuts off. You saw that with the Josiah Stewart strip sack that ended up turning into a USC first down because of a crazy individual play to take the ball back from Kenneth Grant. But I worry about USC's offensive line because they've given us reason to worry. I think that's an area where Wisconsin can level the playing field a lot. And I think if Wisconsin is going to do anything offensively, it's not going to be on the perimeter and it's not going to be down the field. It's going to have to be in the run game. They're going to have enough of a passing game to keep that a threat. USC's defensive backs have been excellent. Their linebackers and coverage have been tremendous. If you guys aren't familiar with the name Eric Gentry yet, you'll become very familiar with it, likely in a frustrating way, because he's a unicorn of a linebacker. He's got a 7'1" wingspan, 6'6" tall, looks like a basketball player, and plays like an animal. And that's the perfect bellwether of this defensive coaching staff. We said going in on the USC show, we'll know a lot about this new coaching staff depending on how they use Eric Gentry and if they even know how to deploy him, because at a certain point last year, they just stopped playing him because they didn't know what to do with him. And that's a crime. When you have a talented, exceptionally gifted player, even if he's unconventional, you got to find a way to use him. So if I'm Wisconsin, I got to get after the quarterback. I got to stop the run, and I got to find a way to run the football consistently. Make it difficult on USC defensively, and make Denton Lynn make his 3rd and 4th down gambles. Right, that's when he's aggressive, and that's the highest risk, highest reward kind of situation for Wisconsin. You can get into those 3rd and 4th downs that are manageable, 3rd and 4 or shorter. It's where USC is going to be hyper aggressive, which means that's going to be an opportunity to make some big plays, because outside of those contexts, Trojans really haven't given up a lot of big plays.
Rushing the passer doesn't. Something
that's a concern, because that is one thing Wisconsin literally cannot do is rush the passer. At least we haven't seen it. I feel better about running the ball. I don't feel great about stopping the run, and I really don't feel great about rushing the passer right now. They were, it was like 130th in pressure rate or 124th in pressure rate nationally. I was reading an article yesterday, and yeah, that's a little bit concerning if you are Wisconsin. My question was going to be, what has to go wrong for USC for Wisconsin to have a chance?
I said the same thing about the Michigan game, and I think it's true for Wisconsin as well. If Wisconsin forces fewer than 2 turnovers, they're not going to win the game. They need to force 2 turnovers, be that an interception, a block punt, something in that special teams category, or just true turnovers. Michigan technically forced 2 turnovers. They gave one back immediately. So I don't know if I was really right. I was technically right about that, but I don't know if I was correct in spirit, because Michigan really only forced the pick 6. So that's a huge turnover, right? They scored points on it, but I think that's true for Wisconsin as well. If Wisconsin does not take the ball away a couple of times, they're going to have a real tough time winning this game. There's always a pathway towards some kind of weird win, as we saw last week, but that pathway gets pretty damn narrow if you don't take the ball away a couple of times. I kind of think it's that simple. If you're Wisconsin, you cannot make any mistakes, and you need to capitalize if and when USC does, because they will. They're still an inexperienced group, despite the fact their quarterback's a redshirt junior. It's going to be his 5th start. They have 4 wide receivers that are super talented, and all of them are true sophomores. They're going to make mistakes. And they have an offensive line that's outside of the center, all freshmen or sophomore. So they're going to make mistakes also. So it all comes down to taking advantage of those mistakes when USC makes them, and not just making them pay for them, but making them pay for them dearly, like Michigan did a week ago.
Cooper, you summed up I was going to say, for Wisconsin to win, fundamentals. We cannot do mental mistakes. Are going to happen. Like we're saying, we're all, everything's kind of new, but the tackling, especially for you guys, you tackle that guy and with 2 minutes left, game might be over, right? I think it's tackling, not turning the ball over, and having less mental mistakes. We'll have a shot, and we have not proven that we can do that yet, but I think those things, fundamentals, no penalties, playing, I don't say a perfect game, but playing a game where we're not giving USC the ability, like we did to Alabama, score points and not let us score points.
I'd add one more thing to it as well, that I think Wisconsin has a unique opportunity to take the fight to USC immediately and out-physical them, not because the Trojans aren't capable of being physical, but simply because of what the fatigue battle looks like. You know, a week after playing an exceptionally physical, grinding game against Michigan, a Badgers coming off a bye week, there's an opportunity there to set a tone that I Bleav in this team's effort too much to say it'll make them fold, but I think it could make life very challenging for them very quickly. And that's a mentality question, right? Like that's far simpler than just playing fundamental football. That's playing football like you want to win. And that's an area that I think Wisconsin's going to have an advantage that I think a lot of USC people are pretty concerned about. That's a tough draw. You know, if Wisconsin looks anything like the old Bielema days with their physicality, even for a quarter, like that's going to create some mismatches that give the Badgers a chance to capitalize on some mistakes, create some opportunities, force a turnover, get a couple tackles for loss. You know, I think that just showing up with the expectation and intention of winning the physicality battle immediately would go a long way towards making this a game that Wisconsin can win. I don't think there's any reason they can't win this game. I think the spread of 14 points is a little uncomfortable. I don't love that. I think there are too many questions about USC up front right now. I agree that it would be an upset to some extent, but it's not a game that's unwinnable. It's no game in the Big Ten is unwinnable for the most part. That's why you play the game, and that's why we join this conference, because you want to have tough games, you want to have quality opponents every week. You know, there's nothing fun about going and beating up on a bad Washington State team. Granted, they're good this year, but most years they're not. There's nothing fun about that. You'd rather have Wisconsin and have to get up and play the game, right? It's great for us as fans, and it's good for the players as men and as football players to have to compete on a weekly basis. You know, no cupcake schedules. We don't like that.
Right. I actually think you bring up a great point. Having a bye week, going to California, it's not an easy trip to do that. I think the 2:30 time, the 2:30 Central, the 12:30 is good for us. I think that's actually extremely helpful. But I agree. You guys went to Michigan and got beat up a little bit. They're a physical team from last year to this year. I didn't think so. I texted everyone when all my California Badgers were like, "Hey, are we going to have a chance?" I'm like, Michigan's doing a good job, pretty much of. You guys are. But that was a battle. I mean, so I was pumped to say, man, USC took some lumps in that game. Same with Michigan. So I'd be happy to kind of play either one of them. But off a bye, I think that does bring up a good point. Like, we're going to California first time. There's a lot you can do in 2 weeks that, USC can't do. You got to fly home that night. It's a long flight from Michigan, even if it's a direct flight. I mean, you got to wake up on Sunday and start all over. And that's not easy. There's no days off. We're coming on Saturday. People are going to be pumped. I know there's a lot of Badgers who are excited even to just be at this game, because I'm excited that USC's in the Big Ten. I think it's so cool. So I think that's a great point, and I think that is a little advantage. I would agree. It's something for sure.
It's definitely not nothing. It was like, they did a little meat tenderizer ahead of time, right? Just roughing it up, make it a little bit softer around the edges. But we're going to get you out of here with 5 rapid fire questions before we head off. So you've been doing play-by-play for a ton of different sports. What's the toughest sport to do play-by-play for?
Baseball. Baseball is brutal because nothing happens for the vast majority of it. It is so much work, and so little of it is actually play-by-play. Sports like basketball call themselves. Football is great because there's all kinds of opportunities to weave stories in and out. Baseball is a nightmare. My least favorite thing to call by a mile.
Who's on your Trojan Mount Rushmore?
Ooh. That's what, 4?
Yep.
All right, Trojan Mount Rushmore. Marcus Allen, Carson Palmer, Troy Polamalu, and Anthony Munoz.
Oh, that's a good 4.
That's a
very
right?
good 4.
Yeah.
I like that
That's
a
deep
lot.
goal.
Yeah, no Reggie Bush, no Matt Leinart.
I love those guys, man. But you got to look at it holistically. There, you got 3 Pro Football Hall of Famers in there, and you got the guy that was kind of the linchpin in setting up that second dynasty that started in the early to mid 2000s. Carson Palmer, like that guy changed everything at USC, and sometimes impact is more important than stats or anything like that, right? Caleb Williams taught us that impact and stats aren't the same thing.
No, absolutely not. And that leads me to number 3. What's your favorite Coliseum memory?
Best Coliseum memory, my freshman year at USC was the fall of 2013. Lane Kiffin got fired after week 3, losing against Arizona State on the road.
On the tarmac.
I remember waking up that morning. I was super drunk the night before. Waking up the next morning in the dorms, and my RA was like, "Hey, did you hear they fired Lane Kiffin?" I was like, "No, they didn't. You're full of it." And they did. So 5 weeks later, I think, number 3 Stanford came to the Coliseum. College game day was there. USC was unranked with Ed Orgeron as the head coach, and ended up winning that game on a 51-yard field goal with 10 seconds left. It's the only time in my entire life I've seen the Coliseum field get stormed, and it was by far the greatest memory I've had in that stadium.
That is an awesome memory. That's really, really cool. Okay, speaking of the Coliseum, for our Badger fans who are going to the Coliseum this week, maybe it's their first time there, what is one food that they have to eat either at or around the stadium?
Heart attack dog. These are the LA sports and like concert event staples. You're going to see them all around the stadium. Basically, what it comes down to is there's a bunch of locals who live around the stadium who Jimmy rigged these weird, strange-looking grill carts on like a shopping cart that you steal from the grocery store. They get like a propane tank, light those things up with a cookie sheet, and make bacon-wrapped hot dogs with onions and peppers and the whole works. They're fantastic. They're like $6-7. They used to be $4, but now everything's more expensive, like everywhere in the world. But get yourself a hot dog, ideally after the game. I've never had a problem with those hot dogs, but if you get hit with something in your gut, you're going to want that to be after the game, not at halftime.
I will second them. However, I had my first one when I moved there in 2010, outside of Staples Center, and I really haven't gone back since. So, no, they are absolutely fantastic. Cooper, you've been absolutely fantastic. Final rapid fire question: final score of the game this weekend.
Final score of the game, I'll go 38-24. No, I'll go 35-24 USC. I think it's a close first half, 21-17 at the half maybe. I think Wisconsin's going to run out of gas offensively in the second half after some good defensive adjustments by Danton Lynn. I think USC runs the ball better, but still not well. They do a pretty good job protecting Miller Moss and eventually pull away in a game that, 11 points is the final, but maybe in the last 10 to 15 doesn't feel quite that close. I think that's my best guess. So take Wisconsin plus the points, and I think that probably hits the over, right?
I don't know what the over is, but if you do want to take a gamble on that, head on over to betonline.ag, our presenting sponsor here, not just at Bleav in Badgers, but across the entire Bleav network, where you can also find Bleav in USC. Cooper, where else can the people find you?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at Cooper Perkins TV. Same goes for TikTok, and then at World of Coop on Instagram. Always taking questions. Happy to engage with any listeners. We should have another episode coming out tomorrow before the game. We're hoping to have Terrell Thomas back on, former second-round pick and USC All Pac-12 selection. Still working out the details and getting that all set up, but wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, give us a download. Love to have you join the listenership.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time, and we appreciate everyone tuning in here to Bleav in Badgers across, the known universe. Thanks again, and until next time, on Wisconsin.
Fight on,
Wisconsin.